Colin, you can have a try. I think you can share the screen now.
Oh, yes, we can. Good, good, good. Here we are. At least I hope we are. Oh dear, we're wrong. I was going through it again. And okay, so this evening I'm going to first of all congratulate you all on attending a class at 8 o'clock in the evening during Chinese New Year. For some of you, the Chinese ones, that's a huge sacrifice. For the others, some of the others, it's just late. Okay, I'm going to talk today about how to publish a scholarly article. The reason I'm doing this is because publishing an article in a learned journal is, or was, I'm not quite sure, I can't quite find the reference this year, used to be certainly a condition for obtaining a doctorate from Hong Kong Baptist University. So completing your course, let alone anything else in your career ambitions, requires publication. It's certainly a necessary stepping stone towards an academic career. If you want to be a professor, then you will need to have publications and you will need to publish. And these days, things are very tough. You need not only a PhD, but more than one article, even to reach the interview stage very often. I mean, of course, that depends. If it's some obscure university in the deepest backwoods of Britain, you might get away without it. But if you want to, certainly in a Hong Kong university, and these days, most mainland Chinese universities, you certainly need publication in order to reach the interview stage. So today I'm going to look at the types of publication available. I'm going to concentrate on journals for reasons I'll explain in a moment. I'm going to talk about how to maximize your chances of acceptance. If you submit an article, then what should you do in order to make sure you have the best chance of it being accepted? So I'm going to talk about what you must do and what you must do when submitting an article, and what you must not do when submitting an article. There are some very naughty things that one can do. And when you get the referees' reports, what you must do when you get their comments on your article. So I'm going to go through from saying what kinds of outlets are available through to the process of being accepted. So first of all, you're going to be one of the authors of this article. I've assumed here that you're the sole author, but actually everything I say would apply to more than one author. And in the social sciences in particular, much less than humanities, joint authorship is very common. First authorship is the best thing to have. It's better to publish an article which is Celine Song and Colin Sparks, better for Celine, and better for me to have Colin Sparks and Celine Song. But any authorship is better than none. Yeah? You'll get credit even if you're the 51st author. And indeed, some scientific, natural science papers do have 50, 60, 70 authors. And everyone gets at least some credit, but first author is best. In the US in particular, some of the cleverest graduate students form syndicates in which they take turns as first author. So you'll get an application from someone who's done their PhD in the USA, and you'll see that they 3 or 4 names appear in all of the articles they've published, and they're first author in one, and second author in another, and third author in another, and fourth author in final one. I'm not encouraging you to do this, but it is a strategy which clever graduate students adopt in order to maximize the number of authorships they can put on their CV. The criteria of who is an author vary very widely, but they usually specify that to be included as an author, you have to have made a substantial contribution to published work. Personally, I'm in favor of inclusivity. Anyone who's made any significant contribution should be on the list. Although I am very strongly opposed to the idea that senior faculty should parachute themselves into their graduate students' papers, which they have no substantial part in producing. That happens. I don't think it happens in Baptist, but it certainly happens in other universities where the senior professor wants his or her name on the paper, and they basically lean on their doctoral student, who probably very proud to have such a distinguished scholar's name there as well. To simply to add them, I don't think that's I don't think that's right. It's claiming credit for something you haven't done. The American Psychological Association, which is the sort of a premier standard setter in the social sciences, at least, you'll have seen the APA style, for example, which you use in writing an article. Here's what they say. Authorship credit should reflect the individual's contribution to the study. An author is considered anyone involved with the initial research design, data collection and analysis, manuscript drafting, or final approval. However, the following do not necessarily qualify for authorship: providing funding or resources, mentorship, that's what I'm talking to just now, or contributing research but not helping with the publication itself. So I think that's actually quite a reasonable definition of who can be an author. And so, if you've done that on an article, even if you weren't the prime mover, any of those things, you're entitled to be recognized as an author. The forms of publication vary from discipline to discipline and within our field. Most natural scientists publish in journals, and these days in what's called preprints. Their works appear before they have actually been published. Computer scientists, apparently, and Celine will know much more about this than I do, apparently don't bother with journals. Journals are too slow moving. They publish in conference proceedings, the results of a conference that they've attended. Many social scientists, which is closer to us, I guess, publish in journals, more or less exclusively. Many of your faculty here at Baptist, I suppose you should say they're at Baptist, publish almost exclusively in journals. Some publish in journals and produce monographs, and most humanities scholars aim at monographs, but also publish in journals. So most of the faculty in the film school, for example, will have the ambition, at least, to publish monographs. They may also publish in journal articles, but monographs is the golden currency. The importance of where you publish varies dramatically, depending on where you are. In East Asia, where you are now, journal publication is absolutely central in the social sciences. I think, I've had actually quite intense discussions, let's say, arguments with some of your senior faculty there at Baptist about whether a book chapter counts as towards as a publication, because they're hard-line social scientists who think if it isn't in the Journal of Advertising, it isn't really worth taking seriously, and that someone who publishes a book, well, that's easy. That's not to be taken at all seriously. And I think they reflect, perhaps in exaggerated form, the overall view of senior academics in East Asia in the social sciences. It's also important in the humanities, but I think perhaps less so. For humanities scholars and book publication generally, the status of the publisher is an important but less vital consideration. The presses of top US universities are high status. MIT Press in new media, for example, University of Illinois Press in Chinese media. Also top universities elsewhere, Oxford University Press, it will be taken reasonably seriously. Some big commercial publishers are also high status in cultural studies and indeed in film. I think Routledge is taken completely as seriously as MIT is in new media. I'm mainly going to talk about scholarly journals in the social sciences. There are different kinds of scholarly journals. So I'm going to talk about how to select a journal, what are the basic requirements for submitting an article, and I'm going to talk about review, revision, and acceptance. So first of all, different kinds of scholarly journals. The word you'll hear frequently, and perhaps you'll have encountered, is the concept of refereeing. Some journals are refereed, others are not. And my advice, it's not an instruction, but it's an advice, is that only journals that are refereed are worth considering from a career viewpoint. That's what the deans, that's what the appointment committees look at. Most journals operate with what's called a double-blind refereeing. So what that means is that you don't know who judges your article. But it also means that the referee does not know who wrote it. So the person who's saying this is a good article or this is a bad article has no idea who you are, who wrote it, and you have no idea who they are. There's a good reason for this. It's designed to avoid personal favoritism. So, you know, I see an article by someone who was my doctoral student 3 years ago, and I think, oh yes, that's a jolly good article, and put it in. If I don't know if it's by who it's by, I might accept it, I might reject it. I'm told things in mainland China are a bit different, but the main currency in international journals, and those I think are the ones that you all ought to be aiming at, are that refereeing is double blind. That means two blinds. It's blind to you and blind to them. As a consequence, when you submit an article, there's something you must do, which is follow the policy of the journal in question. The majority policy is that you have to anonymize the article, completely anonymize it. So your name or any other identification does not appear anywhere in the text. It's impossible to tell from the text of the article that the referee will look at who wrote it. But also, you usually have to anonymize self-quotation. If it's, I'm going to say, as so-and-so and so-and-so says, blah, 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 Sparks 1901, then that I have to anonymize that. I'll have to put author 1901. If it's by someone else, if it's by Celine, I can put song 2022. But if it's by me, I have to anonymize it. There are some journals which ask you to include self-quotation, but as a normal citation. So you don't then indicate that it's your own. So the referee reading it has no idea that what you're citing here is yourself, because it's just the same as every other citation. You need to check the journal's policy on this and make sure your manuscript follows the journal's policy, because any breaches of the journal's policy and you will be rejected. Referees, who I will say some rude things about later, I would like to sort of recognize that right now they're doing an unpaid service to the scholarly community. Referees do not get paid. Journal publishers are the most villainous bunch of robbers in history since, in history, and they don't pay referees, and they actually don't pay much to most editors. So the referees are doing a service to the community. They do it for other people and hope that other people will do it for them. And they therefore have to fit reviewing in with all their other chores, which means it can take a long time. And it means that it's difficult for editors to find appropriate referees. So when they've found a referee who says, yes, I'll read that, they can't say, okay, you must read it by this deadline, because they've got no sanction. The referee is doing them a favor. And they can't threaten the referee. And consequently, getting a response from a journal can take a long time. It can be a considerable period of time between you submitting the article and it appearing in print, and in print still takes place, believe me. So you need to be patient, and you need to start preparing your publications as soon as possible. Don't think you can leave it to the couple of months before you're applying for jobs. Start now, even if you're in year one, start now thinking about what you can publish. Never write anything that you don't try to publish. Try to publish any research project you're engaged in. If you're working with your supervisor seriously on something, try to get your name on that. If you write a term paper, try and get your name on, try and get that published. If you write a love letter, try and get that published. Anything you write, try and get it published. Once something is in a journal, it goes through a process which involves what's called citations. Citations means the number of times your article has been mentioned in another scholarly publication. So if I write an article and it's nobody ever bothers to mention it because it's so boring, it'll have 0 citations. And believe me, I have articles of which that is the case. If you write articles which many other people think is wonderful and cite in their own work, then you'll get citations for each time you are mentioned in another work. Most of these citations are collected together into citation indices. And the most current ones are taken from the most important ones are taken from the Social Science Citation Index. It's the most common source of citations, and it has the highest status with deans, appointment panels, grant reviewers, and so forth. So your CV is going to contain a list of your citations. I'll explain how you do that later. Because the dean, the appointment panel, the grant reviewer are going to be very interested in the fact that you have written an article which other people have taken seriously enough to quote, to cite. The SSCI is relatively restrictive in terms of what it indexes. It doesn't index everything that's ever published. There are 2 other major sources, there are certainly others as well. Google Scholar and Scopus also produce citation indices. Scopus is a bit more liberal, it includes more things, and Google Scholar is very liberal. It includes everything it can get its hands on. So they don't quite have the same status as the SSCI. If you're going to use Google Scholar, employ a program called Publish and Perish. It's free software. It's very, very useful, not simply for citation indices and so forth, but for literature searches and so forth. So it's worth going and taking a look at. I used to use it all the time, and less so now. Citation patterns are not necessarily compatible across fields. They depend partly on scholarly norms in different fields. So natural sciences tend to cite many, many things. Social sciences cite very many fewer people's things, and humanities scholars are much less prone to citation. It depends partly on the size of the field in question. There are lots of physicists and there are relatively few communication scholars. So citation is more likely in physics than in communication. And it depends partly on fashion within a field. If you write on new media, you can expect to be cited lots of times. If you write on radio, no matter how good the article is, it's unlikely to be cited. Radio is not any longer a fashionable medium to write about. 40 years ago, different question, but television was the fashionable medium then. So where you publish and the fashions and the size and the topic you're publishing on are important in determining how many citations you get. But whether you're a radio scholar or a physicist, a large number of citations relative to the area is a good thing for your career, both in terms of being hired and in terms of becoming an associate professor and a full professor. So what is this SSCI, Social Science Citation Index? It's part of something called the Web of Science, which is branded as Clarivate, I don't know, which is a commercial operation owned by 2 large businesses. And it sells a range of services. It's not freely available. Someone has to pay for it. In our case, the library pays for it. So we can get access to its services. I'm not sure we can get access to all of its services, but certainly the most important ones for us. Some things are useful tools for researchers. EndNote, for example, is quite often used to compile bibliographies, lists of works consulted. Others are really designed for university managers. So when they're scheming as to how to push themselves up the research league, university managers look at some of the tools that the SSCI or Clarivate provides. The SSCI isn't the only index. There's a Science Citation Index, which is the big one. Actually, it's the Science Citation Index extended, the CIE, I should have put there. And there's an Arts and Humanities Citation Index, and there's a sort of waiting room called the Emerging Sources Citation Index. So depending on where you're working, you'll be looking at one of these different kinds of indexes. Again, not an instruction, but very strong advice. Only journals that are SSCI and HCI, there are Social Science Citation Index and a Arts and Humanities Citation Index, and possibly ESCI, the Emerging Sources Index, are worth considering for publication in the social sciences. Because if it's not in those, then it ain't going to produce citations. You ain't going to get credit. Most journals will tell you whether they're in these categories on their web pages. So when you looking for and at a journal, look carefully about whether it's part of the SSCI or the AHCI or whatever, because the others will not register in your citation account. There are also Chinese social science citation indexes and Chinese science citation indexes, which are important on the mainland. They have very little international currency, but they're extremely important on the mainland of the People's Republic. They matter if you're job hunting there. They're at least as well, no, maybe not as valuable, but certainly very valuable if you're job hunting on the mainland. Journals included in the SSCI are based on set criteria. Regularity of publication, is it a regular publication or is it just something that someone put together in their spare time? Does it include a range of authors or is it just the editorial clique? And a secret source, which is open to discussion. It's a very patchy record of scholarly publication. Not all journals are there, for example. And books and book chapters are patchily there, although they're trying to improve this. Conference proceedings are patchily there and so forth. So sometimes you face a choice between someone you know has asked you to write a book chapter and you've got an article that you think might go into an SSCI journal. Which do you prioritize? Again, advice, not instruction. If you're in the social sciences, I think the advice is to go for a journal article. If you're in the arts and humanities, then I think there won't be that much of a difference. A book chapter might be okay. It's a difficult question, and you should discuss it with your supervisor and so forth. The decision criteria the SSCI use to decide whether to have a journal in or not are things like the scholarly content, bibliographic information, clarity of language, editorial board composition, author distribution, appropriate citations to the literature, and impact criteria, and so on. So they've got a series of things, but the impact criteria are content significance, for example. That opens a certain degree of interpretation. But it's the SSCI, this commercial company, which runs this and decides. It's not done by scholars, actually. It's done, and actually, SSCI was set up initially by a scholar, but it's since become a large business. Not all SSCI journals are equal. They have impact factors. And a high impact means that the average journal article in a particular journal is frequently cited in other SSCI journals. These reports are collected as journal citation reports. We'll look at those in a bit more detail. The Clarivate lists impact factors for 26,696 journals, which is a lot. Impact factors vary wildly from discipline to discipline. Science, in particular, medical sciences tend to dominate. So the top of the top of the Clarivate Journal Citation report is the Cancer Journal for Clinicians, and each article, on average, was cited by 508.702 other sources. So, a huge number of people. And that's partly because medical science is big. The second was Nature Reviews of Molecular Cell Biology at 94. Third was, I think, the New England Journal of Medicine. Yes, the New England Journal of Medicine at 91.253. So, the sciences, and particularly sciences, medical sciences and sciences related to medicine, tend to have very high citation indexes. Social science citation indexes are much lower. The top SSCI journal is something called World Psychiatry, which I guess has also probably got a medical dimension to it. And its impact factor was 59.4548. Much closer to us, sociological methods and research was top in sociology at 6.933. So you can see very much lower level of citation. So when we think about what is a journal, what is an article which is going to be cited a lot, and a journal which is going to have a high citation index, we're thinking very modestly. We're thinking, I think, in every case under 10. Whereas if you're a clinician, in cancer clinician, you're looking for hundreds. AHCI does not at the moment provide impact factors. It used to, they've changed everything recently, so I had to completely rewrite this talk. And at the moment, they don't have impact factors, at least not that I can find. In our field, we have at least 3 categories in the social science citation index. One is communication, one is cultural studies, and one is film, radio, and television. Those are different subsectors that you can search on, and they're not possibly social science, particularly social psychology, might have articles which are relevant as well. There are, on this basis, 321 journals in the field, including emerging sources journals. They break down very unevenly. Film, radio, and television has 64 journals. Cultural studies has 57 journals, and communication has 208 journals. If we take out the ESCI journals, really the hardcore, 35 for film, radio, and television, 57 for cultural studies, and 95 for communication. Impact factors are low. Communication monographs is the most recent one, was top at 8.667. It wasn't top last year, that was the Journal of Advertising. These things change a bit, the pecking order alters. Journal of Communication of Consumer Culture was top of cultural studies at 4.196. And although no figures are given, Screen appears to be the top of film, radio, and television. Journals are often classified by deans and so forth in quartiles by their impact factor. So there are 4 quartiles, and in the case of, let's say, communication, each quartile has 24 journals. So a Q1 journal, which is where you want to publish, is one of the top 24 journals in our field. Judged by the impact factor, not necessarily by anything else, but by the impact factor. And Q2, Q3, Q4 are the following rankings. If we look at the top 10 journals in the 3 fields in 2020, the 2020 is the most recent year they give because they want to allow time for citations to emerge. This is the film one. So you see Screen, Canadian Journal of Film Studies, Cineast, Cineforum, Asian Cinema, Black Camera, Etica Cine, I guess, Film Comment, and Film History. There are more, but these are the top 10. Yeah. Interestingly, in film, it looks to me from that as they're not all in English. That, as we will see, is actually quite unusual. And I'll come back to that in the 3rd lecture in this series. This is Cultural Studies, Journal of Consumer Culture, Theory, Culture and Society, Communication and Critical Cultural Studies, Sciences Culture, Journal of Cultural Economy, Games and Culture. I'm surprised the Games one is so low, actually, since Games is now probably the largest bit of the media industry. International Journal of Cultural Studies, Asian Studies Review, South Atlantic Quarterly, and Cultural Studies, all in English. And in communication monographs, New Media and Society, Digital Journalism, a very recent entry, and very, very successful journal. Communication Methods and Measures, Political Communication, Journal of Communication, International Journal of Press Politics, Journal of Public Relations Research, Communicar, and Journal of Advertising. As I say, Journal of Advertising was top last year. Communicar is in Spanish, so there is one non-English language journal in the top 10. And as I said, I'll come back to this. Where can you do a bit more intensive research on this? Where can you follow it up? Access is through the HKBU Library list of databases. When you go on the home page, you'll see a list of databases indicated. Click on that. For the journal citation reports, click search for journal citation reports, and for SSCI, search for the Web of Science. The Web of Science is a useful research tool. It's not just a way that managers sort their staff. It's also a research tool. You can search for authors, you can search for articles, you can search for other documents. So this is the Web of Science homepage, yeah? And you can see here, it's got search, marked list, that's journals you've identified, history, what you've done before, alerts, if they want to be handed. You can click on documents to search for articles, and you can click on researchers to search for researchers. If you look at the, you can select which databases you want to look at. Conference proceeding citations, emerging sources citation index, and so forth. There is a tool which helps you select a journal to publish in. It's called, you look for products and you select master journal list, and you get browse, search, and explore journals when indexed, and already have a manuscript, match manuscript. So there is a method of using this tool to find a suitable outlet for your work. I've never used it myself, but it's available. It can also give you the picture of other work by a scholar. So if you're really interested in things that I've published, you select researchers, and where am I? Sorry. I seem to have just, oh, here I am. You get, this is what you get. You select Colin Sparks, blah, blah, blah. You get Sparks Colin, where I've worked. You get a list of my publications from the SSCI core collection. I see 41 of them. And you can, therefore, you can follow up what I've worked on, should you so desire. I mean, it may also be, let's say you want to do, say, in my field, Michael Schubson, or in film, Annette Kuhn, or someone, I don't know. It gives you my name, lists my publications. It tells you something about my publication metrics. I'll come back to those. It tells you, you can see how much I've been cited, and it shows another tool called percentile, citation percentiles, which I'll come back to. So it's quite useful, particularly if you're interested in what's called H indices. You can find these in the SSCI. What is it? Well, it's developed by a scientist, a physicist, called George, or Jorge, I imagine, S. Hirsch, and defined by him as follows. A scientist has an index H if H of his or her N papers have at least H citations each, and the other N minus H papers have at most H citations. I don't think that's actually exclusive. There's two exclusive categories, but anyway, that's the definition he offered. It's the total number of articles that have a citation rate as high as that total. So if someone has 2 articles cited at least twice, they would have an H index of 2, even if they had 200 other articles cited once or 0. Someone who had 1 article cited 1,000 times would have the same H index as someone who had one article cited once. And someone who had two articles, one cited 1,000 times and the other 0 times, would still have an H index of 1. So you can see it's an attempt to balance the breadth of someone's work with the amount it's been used by other scholars in the field. It identifies someone whose work overall has been well cited. It's a blunt instrument, yeah? But it's one of the few instruments that is available other than the opinion of other people. So someone who wrote many papers that were not well cited would not have a high H index, and someone who wrote very few papers, even if they were cited a lot, would not have a very high H index. H indices again vary by discipline. Hirsch himself was a physicist, and he had an H index of 49 when he developed his index. Nobel Prize winners tend to be in the 40 to 70 range, apparently. Social scientists publish few articles and are cited less. So our H indexes tend to be lower. LSE, London School of Economics, one of the top social science institutes in the world, did a study of their staff. And they found that full professors' averages range from fewer than 3 to fewer than 8. So this is the graph. Just to explain this, senior lecturer equals assistant professor. Senior lecturer equals associate professor, and professor is full professor. And you can see that in economics, they had an average of 7.5 or so. In geography, average of sort of 6.5. In sociology, 3.7 or something. Political science, 3 points. And law. So it varies from discipline to discipline, but overall, even in an elite university, the elite staff in the social sciences and economics have a relatively low H index. You can find an H index. It records the H indexes, records of those who publish in the journals it includes. You can find your own citation rate there, and your H index in the Web of Science if you want. Yeah? You can also find other people's citation rates and H indices. For example, your supervisors. So I imagine there'll be a rush to the library to investigate your supervisor. How much actually have they published, and has anyone actually cited them? Or mine, for that matter. And I'll use mine because I don't mind me using mine. I don't want to use Celine's or Wang Yu's or whatever because I don't have their consent. So what you get, you saw this on the initial search page, you get metrics. H index, total publications, sum of time cited, and how many articles are cited. It also gives you 3 other author citation tools. A graph of citation over time. So this is me again. And as I said, I think I said, I didn't really bother about this when I didn't work in East Asia. So I joined HKBU in 2011. And it was made clear to me that I needed to publish in SSCI journals. So I did. And so the number of publications in SSCI journals goes up. It goes down here because I've retired. And the number of indices, this is 2022, so we don't know yet, goes up. So, you can see how well you're doing, basically. And you can find a citation, a comparison of authors' citations compared to the field. So this is each year, and in this year I published 3 articles, one of which was in the I guess about 90 percentile, top 90% of citations. One was about 40, and one was 0. And I think there are 2 here that are 0. My average is about 80. Yeah, this is the average. So if I could get rid of these ones, I'd look even better. So anyway, and this can be useful apart from being fun. if you come across an article by someone you've never heard of before and you wonder whether or not this is entirely legitimate, these are ways that you can find out how to place it. And it also provides an analysis of the fields where an author is published. So this is me, mostly in communication, some in sociology, 2 in political science, 1 in cultural studies, and 1 in radio, film, television, radio. So to give you an idea of the range of an individual as well. This isn't the only metric you can use, and particularly if you're looking up someone Chinese on the Web of Science, that can be quite difficult. Partly because there are lots of people with names which transliterate into alphabetic form in duplicate. So I, for example, I searched on my longtime collaborator, Professor Wang Haiyan from Macau. I searched on her in Web of Science, and there are 42 other Wang Haiyans in all sorts of fields, and I couldn't narrow it down. So you might not have luck with Chinese scholars. An alternative is Scopus. Yeah, Scopus is a little bit more liberal. It includes some more things. This is actually Wang Haiyan's Scopus report, and you can see it's got many of the same things. H index I learn is 8. Don't tell her I showed you this, although they're not secret. I mean, anyone can go and look at it. It's got her articles. It's got their citation count and so forth. So you can get similar kinds of data from Scopus. Google Scholar is very liberal, and everybody who wants to brag will use their Google Scholar score because it's going to be much higher. This is me, and you can see my H index is not 13 but 43. Oh wow! On the road to a Nobel Prize here. And they've got something else called an I-10 index, which is the number of articles that you've published which have been cited at least 10 times. And it's got the list of your articles, goes back much further and is much, much broader, for example. So here, for example, Stuart Hall, 2000, this is me, published in 2020. This is me published in 2021 and so forth. So but it goes back to right to my very postgraduate days. So those are the ways you can work out who's done what, how successful it's been. You may not want to know that, but deans do, appointment committees do, which is why the university pays for this sort of thing. Don't worry too much about this. None of this has anything to do with the actual quality of the work. Articles can be very, very high quality and not cited. They can be rubbish and cited many, many times, and I can think of lots that have been. But they are important because the deans, the appointments and promotion committees take them seriously. Ideally, you would publish in a peer-reviewed journal with a high SSI impact factor and have a high personal H index, ideally. But if you haven't, don't cry. Some publications are the important thing. Most established scholars have a pretty clear idea of the pecking order of journals in their field. So probably most scholars would in our field would say Journal of Communication is number 1. Subfield of advertising, probably Journal of Advertising is number 1. Subfield of new media and society is probably number 1. So there are informal judgments which other people make, and when you're thinking about articles, ask your supervisor. Not all publications are in the SSCI. Books, for example, are not fully recorded, nor are non-SSCI journals. For many people, the SSCI record's only part of their output. About 20% of my output is SSCI, for example, because as I said before I came to East Asia, I hadn't heard of any of this. But still, it's going to do you no harm publishing in a journal with a high impact factor and having a high H index, at least from a career point of view. Okay, so how do you select one of these journals? Well, as I said, the SSCI offers to help you, but you need to find out which journal is most appropriate for your work by visiting their home pages. Go and look at them. Read some of their articles. Look at the sort of subjects they tend to publish on. Look at the style of presentation they like. Check the journal's style sheet for referencing. You can change your own referencing style in Word very easily. It'll give you APA, Harvard, Chicago, a whole range of the standard styles are available in Word, and it'll change it just by selecting the appropriate one. It'll change it automatically, provided you've entered the data. Make sure your article is more or less the right length. Most scholarly articles are between 6,000 and 8,000 words, including scholarly apparatus. Some journal communication, for example, you can get away with 12,000 words, believe me. But most are between 6,000 and 8,000 words. And if you send something to a journal, let's say a journal I'm going to the board of, Q2 journal, that happens, Media Culture and Society. If you send an article of 10,000 words, it'll be sent straight back to you because the limit is 8,000 words. If it's 8,200, you get away with it, but more than about 8,500, they're going to reject it. So very few articles that are longer than what's outlined, what they say, will be considered. Some shorter articles might be published in special sections of some journals. For example, Media Culture and Society has a special section at the end which takes articles of about 3,000 words. Journals have submission guidelines. This is one, not a journal I've ever published in, Communication Theory, and it tells you about how to write your article, ethics of publication, copyright agreement, and so forth. Okay? So if you're thinking of publishing in Communication Theory, this you need to look at. Okay? And as you see here, it's APA. That they like. Every journal will have one of those. So you've decided which journal, and now you're going to produce an article. So the first piece of advice is write from your strengths. An article is a part of your original contribution to knowledge. It's what you know that nobody else knows. Even a short thesis like those at HKBU, 60,000 words, is worth 2 or 3 journal articles, at least. Not the literature review generally, not the methodology chapter generally, but you should mind the substantive chapters, your findings and analysis for material that you can use. Only use the other material, the literature review, methodology, and so forth, to support your original material, because the journal is going to be looking at something that's a contribution to knowledge, something that's worth publishing because it's new. Don't put all your material in one article. There's a technique called salami publishing. It's not very attractive, but people do it all the time. A salami is an Italian sausage, which is sold sliced very, 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 very thinly. So if you've got this sausage of findings, then don't give the journal the whole sausage, slice it. Slice it thinly. And then instead of getting one article, you'll get 3 or 4 articles. It's not very attractive, as I say, but it's part of the nature of the field. Expect to go through several drafts. Don't expect to sit down on Monday morning and be finished by Tuesday evening. Force yourself to write something because you can change it later. Never stint on the references. Although you might have to balance the between text and references to meet the word limit, you might find you've got 9,000 words and you've got 6 pages of references and you think they're all useful and valuable, but which are you going to choose? Are you going to cut your own text, or are you going to reduce the number of references? It's a decision you have to make. And make sure the final draft is in very good English, unless it's Communicar, in which case make sure it's in good Spanish or others. Because remember, the referee has got to get through this. The referee is trying to, is doing you a favor. So I'd say employ a professional editor. There are lots of them. They do excellent jobs. Some people can, some people can't. I can't rather. My wife can. So when I finished a draft, I'll ask her to, could you have a look at this, please? And it'll come back covered in red marks where I've made mistakes. So, it's worth employing a professional editor. Submitting an article. Check the details of what to submit. Make sure you're anonymized following the journal's policy. I'll come back to that now, because if the author can be identified, they will kick it back to you. You'll need to write an abstract, 150, 200 words or something, and provide keywords, usually half a dozen. That's just routine. You may have to separate tables out and submit them individually. So they may ask for a single file with the tables, or they may ask for the tables as either a separate file or different separate files. But you should not have the tables in the text itself. Use the standard submission procedure. That's usually electronic these days, very often through something called Manuscript Central. Use that, and it will give you a link, and you have to set up an account for the journal. Don't send your material directly to the editor, because they get, let's say the Media Culture Society has, I think, about 800 journal submissions in a year, and no editor wants 800 journal submissions landing in his or her inbox. The Manuscript Central is an electronic system which will handle all of the process of refereeing and so forth very efficiently. So don't send the material directly to the editor. This is some advice on handling tables. The journals have instructions for tables in the submission guidelines. APA guidelines, again, are a good general rule, and you can find them on that URL. But you can search on APA guidelines and you'll find it. I've never seen guidelines instructing table placement in the body text. It may be possible, but I've never seen a journal that accepts that. Put a marker in the text where you want the table to appear. Yeah, so this is actually from something I wrote years ago, just been published actually, not a very good article. And so we want table 1 to go out there. So we don't put the table there, we put table 1 about here. Yeah, because when the journal comes to typeset your piece, there may not be possible. It may mean the table would fall across 2 pages, for example, or it may mean that it would require a page of its own, tilted sideways or something. But they know it's going to be about there, yeah. So they know what it refers to, and then you usually place them at the end of the text after notes and references. Some of them want, as I say, separate files, either each individual table or the tables, and some accept the most final page of a single submission. You should be able to learn that from the journal submissions author guidelines. What does a submission site looks like? This is Manuscript Central. This is communication theory again. I chose it because I've never had anything to do with it. And so I make an account, Ned Sparks, password, blah, 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 and then I log in, yeah? And you have to create the account. And then that will take you by the hand and guide you through how to submit things. There is a very important reservation about this. All journals cost money to run. Some journals are subscription-based. The library, or you as an individual, pay to subscribe to the journal. Increasingly, however, they're what's called open access. That's to say, they are not behind a paywall, but that you can access them. Open access, unfortunately, means many different things. Gold OA journals ask you to pay a fee for publication. So if you go on a gold open access journal, you have to pay for publication. And it can be, in our area of the field, it can be $1,000, US dollars, not Hong Kong dollars. Substantially, in the sciences, it'll be much more. For the scientists, it's not so much a problem because their grants will be big enough to cover paying fees. In social sciences, much research is done without a grant, and therefore it can be a difficult question. Hybrid OA journals allow you to publish for free behind their paywall, or you pay a fee and have the article become open access. There is what's called a green route, in which you publish in a subscription journal, but deposit a version of your article in a university or subject repository. Baptist has a repository, and if you're going down a green route, you can publish it in the journal and also have a free copy in the university's depository. And there are some genuinely open access journals, are free to you and free to the reader. The International Journal of Communication from the University of Southern California, for example, the Annenberg School, Westminster Papers in Communication and Culture from the University of Westminster, and there are others. You can find out what individual journals want by going to a site called Sherpa, which will tell you if you're publishing in the Journal of Communication, it's going to want this, this, and this. If you're publishing in another journal, it's going to want this, this, and this. So this is a useful site to visit. A word of warning: there are lots, thousands of things called predatory journals. These are things which offer to publish your article with a payment. In other words, they are gold route open access journals. But publishing in a predatory journal will not advance your career much, if at all. And it will probably cost you around $1,000 US. I mean, I very strongly urge you against this. It's it's a very, very bad thing. So what you might get is you probably get unsolicited emails inviting you to submit to a journal. So, for example, let's say you go to the ICA and you make a presentation. Sometime in the next 2 or 3 years, you'll get a letter which says, "We loved your submission to the ICA. We think you're a really wonderful scholar. Please publish with us." This is an example. This is someone claiming to be called Amy Jason, who's the editor of Advances in Social Sciences and Culture. I have had opportunity to read your paper, Hegemonic Shadows, USA, China, and De-Westernizing Media Studies, which is published in blah, 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 and can tell from your work that you're an expert in this field. One of the worst things I've ever written, I think, other than what I said. It's Advances in Social Sciences, a new peer-reviewed open access e-journal in subject, blah, blah. We are calling for submission of papers, blah, 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 blah. It tells you original papers, 3,000 to 8,000 words, review cycle within 2 to 3 weeks. That's a giveaway. No legitimate journal has a review cycle of 3 to 8 weeks. Means no one's read it, basically. You can't get 2 or 3 referees turning something around if they're seriously reading your paper in 2 to 3 weeks. This is a con. Yeah. What they don't say in this is that we have a publication fee, which is probably about $1,000. I don't know. You'll get these. Treat them with the utmost suspicion. Sometimes they're very, very cleverly constructed, much cleverer than this. And you can see partly from their turnaround time, partly from what they cover: anthropology, sociology, culture, philosophy, education, management, arts, law, linguistics, psychology, political science, history, environment, film and fashion, communication studies, gender, and other relevant fields. That's not a legitimate journal. Yeah. If you get one of these, check with your supervisor and with the librarians. Ask them, what do you know about this journal? Ask the librarians what they know about the journal and so forth. There still is probably something called Beale's List. Beale was a man who worked, I think, for the University of California, Berkeley, who is a librarian. And what he did was he compiled a list of every one of these fraud journals. And he had a series of methods where he found out whether they were frauds or not. The universities told him he had to stop doing it because some of the publishers had threatened to sue the university. But you might still find it somewhere, yeah. And it's worth having a look, yeah, because it's an astonishing list of things, completely fraudulent journals, all with very, very convincing sounding names. Avoid them. Okay, so you've submitted an article to a legitimate journal, and now it's going to be refereed, and the editor is going to decide. Some articles may be rejected as inappropriate for a particular journal. So, for example, let's say you're submitting an article to Screen, which is about multivariate analysis of blah, blah, blah. Yeah? So they're going to reject that because that's not what Screen is. Screen is a film journal. If you're going to subject something to, say, Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly, which is a very legitimate journal, very old journal, it's going to, and the title of your article is Orson Welles as Auteur, a detailed study of Citizen Kane. They're going to reject it out of hand because they're journalism and mass communication. So make sure you're selecting the right one. Many people still won't, and it might be rejected simply by the editor, a desk rejection. It's not appropriate. Usually the work will be refereed by at least 2 and sometimes 3 people. They will score and maybe comment on and offer opinion on your article. If they agree, there may not be much delay. If the first 2 agree, they both say this stuff is rubbish. It'll get rejected quickly. If they say it's wonderful, it'll get accepted quickly. If one says it's rubbish and one says it's wonderful, then the editor will go for a tiebreaker, a third person, to give you a fair crack of the whip. Referees report on a range of aspects of your article: theory, methodology, importance of findings, etc. Sometimes they report several pages of detailed notes. Others are just box ticking. Editors will usually be guided by the referee's reports, but not in my, I'm sorry to say, always. I don't think they should be, but sometimes they have the power to override the referee's report. When you're very senior, much more senior than me, you might be asked to submit an article to a legitimate journal without refereeing, but don't bank on that. The rejection rate for some journals is higher than 90%. And a journal accepts more than about 25% of submissions is not likely to be very selective, very much good, to be honest. But 90% is, sort of the sort of thing that you would expect to a leading journal, let's say, or in my field, journalism, would probably have an acceptance rate of 10, 15% at most. Of course, what makes a journal good is very problematic, but all I can give you here is the conventional wisdom. However, rejection is not the end of the world. If your article is being rejected, that isn't the end of the article. You can send it to another journal. A referee's report. This is what a referee's report looks like from one journal, from Media Culture and Society. And so the referee is asked to say, how original is this? How rigorous is it? How significant is it? How good is its argument? How clearly is it expressed? How relevant is it to the journal? Would you be prepared to look at a revision? No. And what do you recommend? Usually there will be revise and resubmit there. Media Culture Society doesn't have that option because it's so busy that the editorial board couldn't manage it. But a lazy referee will just do this. Yes, here they say things to the editor which you don't get to see. Sometimes they can be rude, and here they get comments to the author, and that might sometimes be 2 or 3 lines. Sometimes it might be 4 or 5 pages, depending on how motivated the referee is. This is one version, but most of them look rather like this. After you've submitted, you have to wait patiently. But after 4 months, it would be legitimate to write to the editor and inquire. In other words, give them a certain amount of time, but 4 months is a reasonable amount of time. I mean, I've waited 6 months for responses. Probably what's happened is the referees differ in their assessment. One likes it, the other one doesn't like it, and the author has had to try and find it. The editor has had to try and find a third referee. But sometimes things get lost. Academic journals, even using computerized systems can lose things. So it's worth politely writing to the editor, very politely writing to the editor and asking what's going on. Eventually, you'll get a response. If the response is they accept you, be very happy, because this is a journal that has an 85% rejection rate. So, you know, you're done pretty well with this. If there are minor alterations, so I say, you know, so you really need to get an editor to look at the language. Yeah? Be moderately happy, yeah? Because they're going to publish it. They just want you to tinker a bit. Yeah? If it's revise and resubmit, think carefully. What have the referees said? What does the editor say? Am I actually with the right journal, or will I do better to withdraw it from this journal and submit it elsewhere? If it's rejection, find another journal. It's at the end of the world. There are, what was it, 208 journals, SSCI and ESCI journals in communication. There are 57, was it, in film, 64 in cultural studies. There are plenty of other fish in the sea. The fact that someone has rejected you doesn't mean that everyone will. Once you have submitted, you can put the article in your CV as under review. It's not worth a great deal, but it's worth something. It shows you're an active researcher who completes articles. Certainly if you're at the beginning of your career, that's worth doing. I'm at my stage in my career. It's not worth that much, but it's worth something. And remember, the only scholar who has not been rejected is the scholar who has never submitted an article. Everybody has been rejected. Even Albert Einstein, I'm sure, was rejected. Colin Sparks has certainly been rejected more times than he cares to remember. So, you know, don't be devastated if you're rejected. It's not the end of the world. If you get revise and resubmit, that's the most common. Yeah, and there'll often be a deadline for resubmission. 2 or 3 weeks, they'll say, for example. If you miss that deadline, they'll consider the article from the beginning again. You should get copies of the referee's reports. These may just be scores, as I said, or they may be 5-page essays. You will often feel insulted by their comments. How could anybody be so stupid as to misunderstand what I have clearly stated and demonstrated? Yeah? Everybody does. Yeah, they think, oh, what the hell do they think they're doing? Of course, you know, if the referee says, "Oh, this is wonderful," you're not going to feel insulted. But if they say rude things, and regrettably, sometimes they do, they're all in a hurry and under pressure. So these are not necessarily, you know, considered responses. And most referees make valuable points that are worth thinking about. Most referees, when they say something, have got a point. Some are stupid and ignorant, or even malicious. Yeah, that's a reality. Yeah? There's a website called The Second Referee, which prints comments by evil referees. Very often, people defending their own territory. You know, we had one of those once when I published wrote an article. And it came back from a referee. I'm sure it was a man because it's so offensive, which was basically I'm a senior scholar. These people are Johnny's comes lately. They think just because they're native Chinese speakers. Sorry, I'm not. Just because they're native Chinese speakers, they can get away with anything. You know, it's a defense of his ownership of the field. Yeah, really nasty. So read the comments and fume. Yeah? Don't worry if you feel angry. Then leave it for a couple of days. Yeah? Get drunk is what I always do. Not for 2 days, but in the course. And then go back and reread them. And you will be surprised. The second time you read them, they make a lot more sense. Not the stupid, ignorant, and malicious ones, but the ones which, you know, you thought first time were a bit misguided. You'll be surprised at how much more helpful they are. So, you know, don't panic when you get revise and resubmit. So you get a revise and resubmit. I would say take their comments seriously, revise and resubmit. You don't have to agree with everything they say. In the case of the outrageous old gentleman that I mentioned just now, we wrote a 5-page reply saying, look, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that, you're ignorant about this, you're instructing us to disregard the evidence, and every graduate student learns don't argue with the evidence. And we didn't accept anything he said. We did what the other two referees said. Change your article when you agree with what the referee said. Leave it the same when you don't agree with what the referee said. You're not under an obligation to do what the referee tells you. When you made the changes, send it back to the editor and include a cover letter explaining what changes you've made in response to the comments. In particular, if you're arguing with the comments, particularly if you're not accepting the comments, make that a persuasive argument, because referees, can be fools, and editors can see that referees are fools. Explain the changes you have not made, in particular the exchanges you've not made because you don't agree with them, and indicate clearly in the text the changes that you have made. So, for example, I always put yellow highlighter on the bits that I've added. The invitation to resubmit is not a guarantee of publication. It will go back to referees. And sometimes you'll be asked to, well, let's see what might happen. After resubmission, it will be refereed once again, perhaps by the same people who did it the first time. If you're unlucky, by very different people. And this can lead to infuriating, contradictory responses. The first set of referees said double the length. The second group of referees said make it half the length. No, the completely contradictory responses, which you have to negotiate. Again, if your article is accepted, be very happy. If it's rejected, I would say select another journal. If it's been through 2 rounds, then I'd say select another journal. They may ask for a third resubmission, a third submission. Usually the editor, it will be the editor usually, it will be much more specific about what you need to do and be very detailed about what you need to do. And you should first of all carefully consider whether you have the right journal. Is this the place for me? If you decide that you have, this time around, I'd say follow their suggestions very closely. If the argument didn't work the first time, listen to them the second time. Once the final decision is made, you will have to wait again. 18 months is not an unusual waiting period for publication in a top journal. This is why I said at the beginning, get writing now. Overall process from submission to publication can be more than 2 years. Luckily, once you have the letter of acceptance, that can go in your CV as in press, and Deans and Co will consider that as good as publication. If you say, I have an article in press in the Journal of Communication, that's fine. They'll love it. It doesn't actually have to appear. These days, they have online first, which means that it's not yet been published in an issue of the journal, but it's available to readers on the website. And that's as good as publication, and it's reducing waiting times considerably. So it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. So what you must do, make sure you've chosen the right journal. Do make sure you've written in the appropriate literary style for the chosen journal. Which journal did this article come from? Overlooking, looking over, neoliberal immigration, amnesty policy in the nation of immigrants. Well, I'll tell you, it's from the Journal of Communication. Journal of Cultural Studies, something like that, overlooking, looking, would never appear in the Journal of Communication. And which journal did this article come from? The effective effect on political judgment, comparing the influence of candidate attributes and issue congruence. That's from Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly. So you can see they've got quite different styles, quite different vocabularies, quite different ways of writing. Make sure they're going to recognize what you've said as being in their framework, if you like, yeah, in their groove. Do make sure your article is not too long or too short. Do make sure your article is in good English. Do make sure the scholarly apparatus is impeccable. Don't leave citations out. Don't put things in that you haven't cited and so forth. And do make sure your article is completely anonymized unless the journal specifies otherwise. So those things you must do. Things you mustn't do: don't attempt personal correspondence with the editor unless absolutely unavoidable. Sometimes it is, but you're not encouraged to do that. Don't argue with the editor or the referees. You can disagree with them, but you're not arguing with them. You don't have to follow everything they say when you rewrite. Don't ask for more detail about the editor's decision, thinking that you'll persuade him to change his mind. He won't. I said, they won't. Don't wait less than 4 months before arguing about progress. Don't submit your article to more than one journal at a time. If they find out that you've submitted it to more than one journal, they will get very, very angry and they'll kick you out. Some journals will insist on first publication, but they will not consider anything that has been published anywhere else, even as a conference paper. Check the journal's policy if you've already published the relevant work elsewhere. Some will. Some journals will accept first English language publication. So if you've written an article in Chinese and then translated it, some journals will accept first English language publication. They will accept prior publication. It would be wise, however, for the translation to have significant and identifiable differences from the original. Things that you can point to and say, this wasn't in the original Chinese version. If you've published almost all of that in another language, you must clearly cite publication details. At the end, you'll put this is a version of the article, blah, 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 which appeared in blah, 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 yeah? That's legitimate, yeah? And if they'll accept that, then that's fine. If you leave it out, it's a bit naughty and you might get slapped on the wrist. In conclusion, and boy, is it time to conclude, if you follow my advice, will you get published in the journal of your choice? Who knows? Who can tell? There's an element of chance in academic refereeing in particular, an element. Who did they choose? Refereeing is not infallible. Referees make mistakes. Fashion is another important factor. And you can see the rise of digital journalism, the journal digital journalism, from nowhere 5 years ago to being number 3 or something now. And that's because there's a fashion to talk about digital journalism. However, I think if you follow my advice, you should have a better chance of getting published. Publishing in first tier journal, Q1 journal, is better than no tier at all, no quartile at all. But if you're rejected by the JOC, try another journal. Yeah? Whatever you do, don't give up. Without publication, you'll not be hired to a research track post. Yeah? And that's, I assume, the ambition of most of you, is that you want to become a university lecturer, and you don't just want to spend your time teaching undergraduates 14 hours a week. You want also to publish, and in order to get also to do research, in order to get that kind of job, you need publications. Wasn't always the case, but it is today, and it gets harder every year. So I'm glad I'm glad I'm at it. Right, that I think is that. I'm sorry to race through it so quickly, but there's 35 slides, and I hope that the recording and the PowerPoint will be available to you, because I think there are some of the things, the links and so forth, you might want to follow up. Now, I see one chat. Hi, Professor Sparks. May I ask what the time difference between a special issue of a journal and the original journal? Whether the difference? The answer is that there really isn't any. The ways in which special issues are edited may differ slightly. Let me talk about MCS, which is it's actually, I think, number 25, which makes the top of the second quartile. Very embarrassing for us that we're not Q1. When we have a special issue, we invite, well, usually people propose themselves as issue editors. One of the editors of the journal will work with them and will have the final say over whether something appears. They will either have got material they derive from a conference, or they will issue a call for papers, or in some cases it will just be their pals. And all of the articles which go in it go through the same process of refereeing and revision and so forth. And the fact you've been invited doesn't mean that you will actually necessarily be published. So it should be as rigorous a process as any issue. It may be the case that in some issues there's less rigor applied, and in some journals there's less rigor applied. I don't know, but that in principle there shouldn't be really any difference apart from the fact that there might well be an invitation to submit. Excuse me, I'm just drinking my coffee. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask? How many people are still awake?
Oh, there's one question coming.
Yeah, I see it. Does academia sometimes feel like elite mim? The academic world is very far from a socialist paradise. It is now and always has been the site of bitter conflicts and competition. These are very often undesirable. Multi-level marketing. Thank you. Oh, I see it's MLM. Yes, I'm just a bit short-sighted. You'll have to explain that to me. I don't see. I think that the idea of scholars in the disinterested and collective pursuit of knowledge is the desirable image of academia, but in practice, it's much more ruthless and much more competitive. So, for example, each university department every 6 or 7 years is graded by external assessors who say, you're very good, you're not so good, you're hopeless. HKBU's communication department, School of Communication and Film, last RAE, which was last year, was it, Celine? Was voted top in Hong Kong. These aren't pressures just on you or just on young people, they're pressures on the institutions. And those pressures affect all sorts of areas like student recruitment. There are elite universities which will only recruit, for example, there is a university in Hong Kong, let me not say anything else, which will only recruit mainland Chinese students from a very small select list of universities, whose names you can guess, and they won't consider anyone else. That's in my view ridiculous, and I don't know whether it's the policy now in Baptist, but it certainly wasn't when I was the director of the doctor program. We looked at the candidates rather than the universities they'd been to. So, there is a very, and it's not just in Hong Kong and not just in China, it's also in the USA. Everybody knows that Harvard is the top university. Everybody in Britain knows Oxford and Cambridge are the top universities and so forth. So it's a very, very bitter competitive environment. And journals are similar. It's not a nice world. Do I regret joining it? No, I don't. And not because I think this is nice, but because the alternatives are worse. Who wants to work for a living? Much better to be an academic. So I don't know whether that's multi-level marketing or not, but certainly it's these are. I've been talking about how to succeed in an environment marked by very acute elitism. And that's just the way the academic world is. And that's, it didn't, when I started off, it wasn't true really in Britain. Either you were a good chap or you weren't a good chap. Either your supervisor was someone who was well known or he wasn't. It was he in those days. But then, in the USA, it's always been highly competitive. The UK and Europe, and UK over the last 30 years, Europe over the last, I guess, decade or so, China increasingly over the last decade, I would say, Hong Kong for the last 20 years or so. This is a general feature of academia. Sorry, I'm not sure that's a very good answer, but it is what I think. Not at the same time, I would say. I would say if you've written an article in Chinese, get it published first in a Chinese journal, and then try and get it published in an international journal, and vice versa. But remember that try to make the versions significantly different. And if you have been published elsewhere beforehand, be sure to acknowledge that fact in a note at the end of your article.
Okay, so if no more questions, so thanks, Colin, so much for really so much rich knowledge, and it's really very comprehensive. It's very, very helpful. So we are looking forward to our next talk next week. Thank you so much, Professor Sparks.
Okay, thank you very much for listening to me and for staying awake long enough to reach the end. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.